Good morning, Doug. Secretary Michael here.
Good to hear from you, Michael. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Only leave that muted the whole time. You're on the phone.
Okay, we're just counting to see if we have a quorum, so invite everyone, please. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Kathy, I've got 7. That's a quorum. Right now, we're missing Jay, Wayne, and Lucy.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Do you want to begin the meeting, or do we want to wait?
Let's just wait one more minute.
Kathy, I'll note that this is Daniel. We had several requests for the meeting link. I did resend that to all members of the review board, so people should have access to that.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. And hopefully, I'm just making sure everyone can see the screen okay. We're just seeing one slide at a time, having a few technical issues. So, but just let me know when you want to begin.
I can see the screen.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay, without further ado, I think we can call the 185th meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation to order. Greetings, everyone. Today is Thursday, September 9th. I'm calling the meeting to order at 10:02. There's a contingent meeting at People's Island Visitor Center in Waterford, New York, and other people meeting remotely. Today's meeting is being held remotely as allowed under Chapter 417 of Parks Law, signed into law by Governor Hochul on September 2nd, 2021, which grants an extension of the Open Meetings Law waiver until January 15th, 2022. Therefore, we will be using the voting method employed during the previous remote meetings, in which I will call for any objections or abstentions, and if there are none, the motion will carry by unanimous consent. The purpose of this quarterly meeting is to conduct the business of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation, including approval of a slate of National Register nomination forms, our approval of the nominations aids Commissioner Eric Kulisade in making his decision to approve. We will move now on to the roll call and the introduction of the State Review Board members. I am the State Review Board Chair, Douglas Perot. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the University of Buffalo. I also serve as president of the New York Archaeological Council. And I serve on the board as not only the chair, but as an archaeologist in terms of my area of expertise.
Wint Aldridge.
Present. I was the former Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation at State Parks and fill a position as historian.
Carol Clark.
Good morning, all. I'm Cheryl Clark. I'm an adjunct professor of historic preservation at Columbia University. I also teach graduate students in the field at Pratt Institute, NYS, Deputy Commissioner.
Carol, we can barely hear you. Is there a volume control at your end?
How's that? Is that better?
Marginally.
Slightly better, but not that much.
Okay, well, that's about the best I can do. How's that?
Okay.
You got the whole introduction? I'm sure you all know me.
Yes. Jay DiLorenzo. Kristen Herron.
I'm present. I'm Kristen Herron, Program Director for Architecture and Design and Museums at the New York State Council on the Arts, and I serve as the proxy for our chair.
Erica Krieger.
Hi, it's Erica Krieger. I'm the Assistant Director of the Department of State, Division of Building Standards and Codes Variance Unit. I'm here representing the Secretary.
Jennifer Lemack.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Chief Curator of History at the New York State Museum, and I serve as the Commissioner of Education's proxy.
Wayne Goodman.
Present. I'm Wayne Goodman, Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York in Rochester. And Michael and Doug, I do need to depart today's meeting at 12:45. Thank you.
Gretchen Soren.
Good morning. I'm Gretchen Soren. I'm the director of the Cooperstown Graduate Program in Museum Studies.
And welcome, Gretchen, to your first meeting.
Thank you.
Lucy Waletsky. Lucy, I can see that you're logged in, but we're not hearing you. Are you on mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Lucy.
Okay. Well, I was saying that I'm chair of the New York State Council of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. And unfortunately, this will be my last meeting as I'm retiring at the end of December, but I've been very grateful to learn a lot from all of these meetings over this 17 years. I've been well, actually 14 in my in my position as chair and 17 on the State Council.
Well, that is breaking news for us, Lucy. We congratulate you on your retirement and thank you for your over almost 2 decades worth of service.
Yes, I know. Well, I'm very fortunate to be serving at such an exciting time.
And it appears that Chuck Vandry has also joined us from a canoe in the Adirondacks. Chuck, are you here?
Yes, I am, Michael. I'm not in a canoe today. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Vandry. I'm the Historic Preservation Officer for the Department of Environmental Conservation and an archaeologist by training. And I hold the Commissioner of Environmental Conservation's proxy on the board.
Mr. Chairman, that represents 10 members of the board present, which represents a quorum.
Thank you.
And when Wayne has to depart at 12:30, that still leaves us with 9 members, also a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Moving on to the next agenda item, the approval of the June 2021 minutes. Does anyone have a question or comment about the minutes? I know some comments and editorial comments were received. Any other comments about the June minutes? Or a motion to approve?
This is Kristen, and I'll move the approval.
And I'm happy to second it, Lucy.
Any abstain or opposed? All right, minutes are approved.
Excuse me, Doug, it's
Yeah.
Kathy. I just wanted to go back to the roll call. I see that Gretchen Soren, our newest board member, is on, but I don't think she was part of the roll call. So you might want to double check that if she's still with us.
No, she was, and she introduced herself, and I welcomed her.
Yep.
Okay,
We're all set.
apologize. Again, technical difficulties on our end. Room. Never mind.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I appreciate you thinking of her. Moving now to the Deputy Commissioner's report, Daniel McKay.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to our State Review Board members for your time and attention and commitment today. I appreciate your flexibility with the format changes. We had initially expected to be meeting in person today, and acknowledge that some members are attending in person and others remotely. Anyway, we thank you for your continued commitment to the work of this board. As Doug noted, but I want to make clear, the adaptation in today's meeting was made possible by Governor Hochul's extension of virtual access to public meetings under New York State's open meetings law. This extension allows New Yorkers to virtually participate in local government meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic. Virtual access was initially implemented by executive order. It was executive order that allowed us to meet remotely up through the June meeting during last year's state of emergency. That executive order, that initial executive order, allowed state and local government meetings that are normally held in person to be held remotely instead, as long as the public has the ability to view or listen to the meeting, and as long as the meeting is recorded and later transcribed. And obviously we meet those obligations here. This virtual access is now a statutory requirement. It is no longer being implemented under state of emergency, but due to legislative passage of the extension. We appreciate what this does for us, because not only does it allow us to maintain safety and protocols under the pandemic, but I think we've all seen and appreciated that it really extends our ability to involve and engage the public in the work of this board. We welcome members of the public to all or part of this meeting, as you may be interested, and look forward to your input as you see fit as each nomination proceeds for review. There is much for me to report today. A lot has transpired since our last meeting in June. First, let me welcome Dr. Gretchen Soren, who is Director of and Distinguished Professor at the Cooperstown Graduate Program, affiliated with SUNY Oneonta and based in Cooperstown, excuse me. Gretchen, in addition to extraordinary academic credentials in the museum field, is also an author and influencer in the world of museum and cultural studies and museum education. And we are so very pleased to have her expertise join this board. It's long overdue, Gretchen. We thank you for your patience, and we welcome you and your insights to our work.
Thank you.
Secondly, let me share news of a pending departure. Michael Lynch, who is our director of the Division for Historic Preservation and secretary to this board, will be retiring from his director position here later this fall. Michael has served many roles here at the division during 2 extended professional stints with OPRHP, and has performed a remarkable range of duties with diligence, and overseen and administered a remarkable time of growth, reorganization, and new responsibilities for our piece of New York State Parks. Michael will be honored with a resolution from this board in December. Chairman Perot and I will prepare and coordinate that with members of this board in anticipation of that next meeting. So sorry to share that news. And Michael can comment further when he sees fit. Among other transitions on our senior leadership team here at the division, I want to share that Nancy Herder has been named as our new director of the Technical Preservation Bureau. She is succeeding the retired John Bonafide in that title. Nancy will oversee the Technical Preservation Services Bureau, coordinating consultation for SHPOs and environmental review for both above ground and below ground resources. More than 15,000 reviews per year that come through this agency. Nancy, in her former capacity as coordinator for the archaeology unit, has hired Jeff Bendremer to serve as the division's NAGPRA coordinator. That is the coordinator of our Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act responsibilities. Jeff is a preservation professional and educator with over 30 years of expertise in administration, anthropological and archaeological research, undergraduate instruction, and tribal government consultation. He will be joining us on a 3-year contract position that will address our agency's responsibilities under the federal NAGPRA statute. Mr. Bendremer will update and complete an inventory of our historic site and museum collections relative to Native American artifacts and facilitate any needed repatriations to Native American representatives to assure our agency's full compliance with that federal statute. Beth Cumming, in her role as coordinator of our technical and tax credit consultation unit, has hired Sarah McIver to join that unit. Sarah comes to SHPO from an impactful career at the MTA, where she coordinated that agency's often complex submissions regarding transit projects to this office. Sarah is relocating to Albany area from the greater New York City metro area and will start work within the next week or so. And Beth is now pursuing hiring a second staff person to be added to that compliance and tax credit unit. Finally, I will take my time, conclude my remarks by noting that we will shortly announce the first round of awards for the Genesee Valley Rural Revitalization Program. This program provides funds, grant funds to rural units of government, not-for-profit organizations, and commercial property and business owners in the Genesee Valley to rehabilitate historic buildings. The program is made possible by a generous grant from the Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Fund, as administered by the National Park Service, Department of the Interior. We were very fortunate to get a significant award from the National Park Service. We'll be administering this award in 2 rounds. The first round, the announcement of the first round awards is imminent, and those awards will total more than $300,000 in historic preservation grants. We have matching funds that have been provided by the Rochester Area Community Foundation, the Letchworth Gateway Villages, and the Landmark Society of Western New York. Thank you, Wayne. And an application round for a second and final round of funding totaling over $400,000 in awards will be announced later this fall. I give great credit to Fran Stern and our staff for taking on the responsibilities of coordinating administration of this program with the Landmark Society of Western New York. Wayne, credit to your staff as well for their engagement here. Finally, let me just say, obviously the state and this agency are experiencing a significant transition as Governor Hochul comes on board. Our new lieutenant governor was sworn in just this morning. I just want to report significant optimism. Our agency has had extensive contact and touches with Governor Kathy Hochul over her term as lieutenant governor. She is a frequent visitor, both professionally and personally, to the New York State Park System. She is an avid boater on the Erie Canalway. She knows our parks and our park regions well, and we look forward to a strong relationship there. So that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner McKay, and we'll move on to the State Historic Preservation Plan with Daniel McEnany.
Thanks, Doug. Good morning. I have a very brief update on the state plan. I want to thank the board, first of all, for supplying very thoughtful comments, which have been incorporated into the draft. Following the seeker requirements, we are doing our public meeting on the 28th. I've dropped into the chat the location of the announcement of that public meeting and a link to the current draft, which is in text form. Following that meeting, we will finalize the plan by October 15th, incorporating any additional comments and satisfying seeker. We are working very closely with a graphic design firm and doing a layout with exciting photos. So it's going to be really kind of stunning in the end to see it all come together. We're going to do a limited printing only to the legislature, and in our mission to remain more paper free, this will be a digital document. So that is my very brief update on where we stand today, and very excited by the next time we meet, we will have a final document available to the public.
Thank you, Daniel. By way of a chair's report, I just have a couple brief announcements. I would like to state that the board did review the State Historic Preservation Plan. I circulated the plan to the board on July 14th and asked for comments to come back by the 28th. I want to thank Carol Clark and Kristen Herron and other members of the board for providing really good constructive comments. Does anybody on the board have anything they want to say about the Historic Preservation Plan at the meeting, or any quick comments about that? That's fine. The one comment I had that I hope will be added is this idea of a land acknowledgement statement. As president of the New York Archaeological Council and as being a member of numerous boards and entities throughout the state of New York, more and more entities and agencies are including a land acknowledgement statement with their meeting openings. And it's simply acknowledging the fact that Native American groups resided in this land before we did, and it's giving deference and some respect to groups that came before us, and I think that would be an important addition to the statewide historic preservation plan. I'd like to announce that the State Council of Parks meeting will be September 28th and 29th in the Allegheny region. I'll be attending that and providing a report back to this group. It's going to be a fun 2 days and exciting to get together with those people and meet face to face. We've already covered the remote meetings voting method, and I do want to congratulate Nancy Herder on her promotion. She and I both got our PhDs from UB in the same year, and she's a close friend and colleague, and I just want to take my hat off to her and congratulate her on her career. That concludes my chair's report, and we can move on to the National Register reviews. I would observe that it's 10:21, and we are well ahead of schedule right now.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is Kathy Howe, head of the Survey and National Register Unit. We are trying to get our slides to advance, but we've got a roster today of 19 nomination proposals spread throughout New York State. The properties being presented today represent varied histories, including a stone castle built by a Catskills photographer and aviator. We've got a Buffalo bakery famous for its Wonder Bread, an early Arabic-speaking Christian church in Brooklyn, and many more. Now, of the 19 nominations today, we have a large number, 7 that represent commercial tax credit projects, and we have 2 homeowner tax credit projects as well, as far as the group. A special thank you to all of the property owners, sponsors, and consultants who have worked so hard to prepare today's nomination draft, working alongside with our expert survey and National Register staff. Again, I want to welcome today's guests. We have some students, I believe, who are joining us from SUNY Oneonta. They helped prepare one of today's nominations. And then I'm going to ask that staff actually make introductions for any owners or sponsors who are participating today, and some of which who may want to say a few words. And one more thank you to Virginia Bartos of our staff, who is always working hard to put together our PowerPoint presentation, and also a thank you to Dan Boggs and James Carter for assisting with today's somewhat challenging WebEx technology. So with that, we are going to begin with Jen Wachowski with the first nomination out in Buffalo. Thank you.
All right, good morning, good early morning. I've got 3 nice tax credit projects from Buffalo to go through. So the first one is the St. John Canty Roman Catholic Church Complex. It's significant as one of Buffalo's most prominent church complexes associated with the city's Polish and Polish American communities. Located on Broadway in the Broadway-Fillmore neighborhood, the complex is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of ethnic history and Criterion C in the area of architecture. The buildings of the church complex demonstrate not only a varied collection of architectural styles, but also reflect the growth of the Polish and Polish American community in Buffalo. By the time the present church was constructed in 1891, this Polish community was growing and expanding significantly, establishing centers like St. John Canty, which served as a hub for Polish religious, educational, cultural, and social activities. Next slide. The St. John Canty Roman Catholic Church complex was established in the late 19th century to serve a Polish immigrant community that had recently emerged in Buffalo's east side due to its proximity to the railroad lines and other industrial employment opportunities. With church services, classes, and activities provided in the Polish language, the church was integral to developing a cohesive community, even at a time when the area was known for its lack of public services and high crime. The construction of the school, convent, rectory, and lyceum reflects the need to expand the church campus to provide all the necessary services and social activities to this growing community in the early 20th century and well into the mid-20th century when the parish population reached its peak. St. John Canty is one of a handful of prominent Polish churches in the community and was critical to keeping Polish traditions, language, culture, and history alive. By the early 1900s, churches like St. John Canty helped establish Buffalo's east side, particularly the Broadway-Fillmore area and vicinity, as a Polish city within a city. Approximately 80,000 Polish Americans lived in the area then, making Buffalo's Polonia one of the largest Polish communities in the country. Next slide. The complex consists of 4 contributing buildings: a Gothic Revival church built in 1891 to the designs of architect James C.O. Sullivan, a 1917 rectory, a 1927 convent building, and the Lyceum building designed by J. Zakruski and Son in 1930. The Lyceum contains a 2,000-person auditorium, a dining hall, a gymnasium, and educational spaces. An addition to the Lyceum was constructed in 1966 when it was converted to a school, at which time an older 1894 school building was demolished. Next slide. The period of significance for the St. John Canty Roman Catholic Church complex begins with the construction of the church in 1891 and includes the construction of the rectory in 1917, the convent in 1927, the Lyceum in 1930, and the Lyceum addition in 1966. The year 1966 marks the end of the period of significance when the addition to the Lyceum was completed. This period also includes all major changes to the buildings and marks the era during which the church was a primary center for Polish and Polish American life. So this is St. John Canty Roman Catholic Church complex. Are there any questions on this?
Questions or comments about St. John Canty from the board? Well, I would comment that it was really interesting to read the history of the Polish community and the detailed history of the development of the church complex through time. It's very well written, very enjoyable read.
I will pass your comments to the consultant.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
This is Wayne. I'd make that motion.
Do we have a second?
It's Erica. I'll second.
Okay. Is anyone opposed or abstaining from this vote? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Moving on to Perot.
So the American Grain Complex was listed on the National Register in 2012 under Criterion A and C for engineering, industry, and architecture as an intact group of buildings that illustrate Buffalo's leading role in the grain and malting industries, demonstrating the process and technology of grain processing and shipping. The nomination boundary for the American Grain Complex is being expanded to include an adjacent resource to the immediate west, the Perot Malting Company facility, which was also associated with the malting industry. Each resource individually meets the National Register criteria. However, the two are being nominated together because they share one industrial feature, an overhead conveyor that connected one company's elevator to the others, and because they share similar themes related to the brewing industry. Next slide. Located in Buffalo's Elevator Alley along the Buffalo River, the Perot Malting Company facility played a leading role in the transshipment and handling of grain to produce malt for the brewing industry and reflects the technology and equipment associated with these industries. Significant under Criterion A for industry, the facility accommodated every aspect of grain handling and malting activity, including offloading, storage, and malting, followed by shipment of the manufactured product by rail and vehicle throughout the United States. Sophisticated in terms of its construction methods, architectural design, and malting process, the Perot Malting Company facility is an excellent representation of innovations in the grain and malting industries. The period of significance for the Perot Malting Company facility is 1906 to 1963, the same as for the adjacent American Grain Complex. The first construction phase began in 1906, and the facility was sold when the Perot Malting Company was dissolved in 1966. Next slide. The Perot Malting Company was allegedly the oldest continually operating business of any kind in America by the time it constructed its malting facility in Buffalo in 1906. The business was founded in Philadelphia in 1687 by Thomas and John Morris and then acquired by the Francis Perot family company in the early 1800s. These families were linked through marriage. While it is uncertain if this claim to be the oldest business in America is entirely true, its 1687 origins are certainly significant in relation to the Perot Malting Company facility. Owned and operated by several generations of the same family until it was dissolved in 1963, the Perot Malting Company business was certainly the oldest surviving malting business in America. Next slide. The Perot Malting Complex consists of two portions that are connected by an enclosed walkway at the 5th story level, the Perot Elevator to the west and the Perot Malt House to the east. The Perot Elevator has a rectangular massing and is 13 stories tall, with concrete cylindrical bins rising 100 feet from the ground, a 1-story head house on the 9th floor, and a 5-story steel-framed workhouse towering above the bins. The Perot Malt House is an L-shaped massing with a brick and concrete 5-story portion to the west and a 3-story portion extending east. An elevated conveyor pathway enclosed in corrugated metal connects the Perot elevator to the American elevator to the west at the 10th story. This connection allowed the Perot Company to utilize the marine arms of the American elevator to offload grain from barges in the river. Next slide. The facility is also significant under Criterion C in the areas of architecture and engineering as a building that illustrates significant innovations in the process and technology of malting and grain processing, as well as the method of construction of building the components themselves. The facility includes portions that house the functions involved in the transshipment of grain and malting, offloading, weighing, storage, analysis, processing, production into malt products, and reloading for shipment to distant markets. When constructed, the facility employed the latest engineering achievements in the processing of grain, specifically that of the malt house and grain elevator. In malt house design, the Perot Company facility provides an excellent intact example of early 20th century malting processes that utilize the salad and pneumatic box system, innovative for the time. In grain elevator design, the standards and technologies utilized in continuous slip-form concrete construction and movement of grain through pneumatic conveyance was set at the American Grain Complex and applied shortly after at the Perot Company facility. The Perot elevator main house and annex illustrated two different and notable methods of continuous slip-form construction, bin layout, and bin hopper design, thus representing the evolution of construction directly associated with the grain industry. Next slide. The Perot elevator was built in 2 phases by the same designers and contractors as the neighboring American elevator. In 1906-07, the south end of the Perot elevator was constructed by James Stewart and Company, consisting of 12 concrete bins and the steel-framed corrugated metal-clad head house and workhouse. In 1933, the north end, known as the annex, was designed by H.R. Waite and constructed by Monarch Engineering. Due to the shape and orientation of the site, the lack of frontage along the Buffalo River prevented the elevator from being oriented parallel to the water, which was typically preferred for the offloading and loading of lake freighters. Instead, the elevator was oriented essentially north-south, perpendicular to the river, with the workhouse located at the south end of the facility. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. The Perot Malt House was built by James Stewart and Company in 1907 with additions constructed in 1936. The malt house consists of several interconnected units, each designed to house a specific stage of the malting process. Overall, the Perot elevator has an L-shaped massing that contains several connected units that are united but visually distinct in materials and form. The 5-story kiln house to the south, the 5-story workhouse, and the 4-story steeping house in the northwest, the 3-story germination wing to the northeast, with the 3-story north wing at the north end of the building, and the enclosed walkway at the 4th floor leading west to connect to the Perot elevator. So this is the Perot Malting Company facility. Are there any questions on this project?
Could you just explain how it's a boundary expansion again?
Well, it's a boundary expansion because it's actually physically attached to the neighboring building.
Which was nominated previously.
Yes, so a National Register boundary should not cut through a physical connection of any sort, whether it's a conveyor belt, a wing, anything like that. So when they came to us to nominate this particular building, we actually reached out to the National Park Service to figure out an approach to nominate this particular resource, which was physically attached to the neighboring building. So
excellent. I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion to approve? Well, I'll move it since it has something to do with beer and it's in Buffalo.
That's right.
Second, anybody want a second?
I can second again. I'll also go for beer in Buffalo.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Erica. Any opposed or abstain? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Doug, this is Daniel McKay. I just want to note, Jen, thank you for that presentation. An extraordinarily complex set of processes within the walls of those buildings. It's going to be a fascinating project to undertake under the rules and restrictions and opportunity of the federal and state tax credit program. So this is a project that we might want to get updates on as the National Park Service review proceeds on adaptive reuse of that structure.
Really good integrity and very good interior photography as well, showing all those working parts still in there. So nicely done. Thank you.
And last but not least, from beer to bread.
Yes.
So we have located at 356 Fougeron Street near Genesee Street in Buffalo. The Continental Baking Company factory is significant under Criterion A in the area of industry and Criterion C in the area of architecture. The building is architecturally significant as a large-scale industrial baking factory that reflects the advancements of the baking industry during the 20th century in Buffalo and throughout the country. The building is additionally significant for its affiliations with several prominent baking companies, including the Continental Baking Company, one of several companies to produce wholesale baked goods at the factory. Today, the building retains substantial architectural details and an interior plan that conveys a historic understanding of the building's original functions and its significant role as a large-scale baking factory. So next slide, please. Significant under Criterion A for industry, the building was designed as an industrial bakery and occupied by several related nationally significant baking companies during the 20th century. Constructed as the company headquarters for Ward & Ward in 1915, the factory later became a branch of the Continental Baking Company between 1924 and 1968 and was operated by the Interstate Bakeries Corporation before its closure in 2004. Numerous new products that became widely popular across America were produced at the plant during this long period, including Wonder Bread starting in 1925, the Twinkie in 1930, Snowballs in 1947, Ding Dongs in 1967, and Ho-Ho's snack cakes also in 1967. During this entire time, the factory was operated as a large-scale industrial manufacturer of baked goods, where numerous breads and cakes were made, packaged, and shipped. The construction and operation of the factory also reflected the general trend towards consolidation and a shift towards large-scale production in the baking industry during the early 20th century. Next slide. Significant under Criterion C for architecture, the building architecturally expresses ideals typically upheld by the food industry overall. Architect Corey B. Comstock was specifically known for his specialty in industrial baking designs, and he modeled the Buffalo plant on one he designed for Ward & Ward in Brooklyn in 1910, which was demolished in 2007. Advertised often as, quote, a snow white temple of bread-making cleanliness, this building was exemplary of the building industry's emphasis on scientific and sanitary conditions. The Buffalo factory's design features many aspects that articulate the baking industry's emphasis on hygiene, trustworthiness, and food safety via mechanized production. Elements associated with Renaissance Revival style architecture, typically reserved for banks and civic buildings, attempted to communicate tradition and trust among customers. The building was designed to create and exhibit a clean factory environment that could demonstrate the company's commitment to clean food production that would be trustworthy for purchase. Next slide. The period of significance begins in 1915 when the building was constructed and ends in 1971, 50 years ago. This era marks the period during which the facility was at its most significant in the national baking industry and encompasses all major changes and additions to the building. The Continental Baking Company was a subsidiary of a larger corporation by 1971, and the building continued to operate according to its original function and design until it closed in 2004. So this is the Continental Baking Company factory. Are there any questions?
Another really good form. A lot of great information in here. Wonder Bread was the first bread to be sliced in packaging and widely distributed. Also, the level of detail in this form is excellent, including during World War II, there was a slicing suspension because steel blades for slicers were so rare because of the war effort in recycling steel.
It's amazing how those sort of regulations trickle down to even the most mundane places.
Yeah, it's a remarkable piece of history involved in this form. Excellent. As an archaeologist, I have a special interest in Twinkies because they're virtually indestructible. Bill Rathje does a garbology project where he digs in landfills, and one of the things that he routinely finds in remarkable states of integrity are Twinkies and hot dogs.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, but I digress. Other comments about Continental Baking? Or a motion to approve?
This is Wynn. I'll move approval.
And a second?
Jennifer
This
Lemack.
is Kristen and I'll second.
Jennifer Lemack got in there first.
No.
And it was a great nomination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, this motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right, moving now to Binghamton and James Spinelli with the Main Street Historic District.
All right, thank you. The Main Street Historic District, located in Binghamton, is significant under criteria A and C in the areas of community development and architecture, as it illustrates the commercial, residential, civic, and religious development of a concise 9-block section of Main Street between 1858 and 1940. Located west of the Chenango River, this area of the city developed in the late 19th century as Binghamton expanded beyond its downtown core following the construction of the Court Street Bridge, the establishment of Main Street as a major transportation corridor, and the opening of streetcar service in 1873. Next slide, please. The expansion of the city's transportation system in the mid to late 19th century spurred rapid development on Binghamton's west side. With the improved ease of access to downtown Binghamton, the neighborhood along Main Street developed rapidly into a collection of residences interspersed with commercial, civic, and religious buildings to serve a new class of residents who could live outside of the city center and commute to work. Throughout its history, the 9 blocks became a diverse and vibrant residential and commercial spine, serving the surrounding residential developments to the north and south while retaining its distinctive character. Next slide, please. The district is characterized by a collection of buildings exhibiting both high style and vernacular forms of architectural styles popular during the period of significance. Residences, churches, a school, and social clubs were interspersed, and many were designed by some of Binghamton's best-known architects, including Isaac Perry, Charles Fosbury, Walter Whitlock, Alfred Bartow, and members of the multi-generational Lacey family. Several residences in the district were the homes of prominent citizens of Binghamton, including the builder, businessman, and politician John Stuart Wells, time clock inventor Harlow Bundy, and lumberman Alonzo Robeson Jr., all of whom chose to live on the West Side's most prominent street. Next slide, please. Also located within the district, but outside of the period of significance, the Merrick Civic Association building is considered individually eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a rare and excellent example of new formalism within the city of Binghamton. New formalism rose in prominence as an architectural style during the 1950s and is a renunciation of the austere and unyielding forms of modernism. Designed by the firm of A.T. Lacey and Sons and completed in 1966, the one-story concrete ACA building is consistent with the characteristic defining features of new formalism, with the freestanding and self-contained building standing in stark contrast to the neighboring 19th century and early 20th century houses along Front Street. The American Civic Association was founded in 1939 by 11 immigrants whose intent was to promote Americanism to other foreign-born citizens of the greater Binghamton area. As the association matured, it both assisted residents in becoming naturalized citizens and strengthened the intergenerational relationship among immigrant groups through adult education classes. The district has a letter of support from the city of Binghamton, who is also the sponsor, and it has 4 letters of objection. That is the Main Street Historic District in Binghamton.
James, are you implying that that particular building that we saw last is not part of the district, but is only individually eligible?
It is part of the district. There is a provision that allows you to include buildings that are not part of the period of significance or the areas of significance of the main district, but are significant enough on their own that you could list them individually if you wanted to. And so you call it out separately with a separate description and separate argument for significance, but it's included in the district. So it's contributing, but it's not part of the period of significance.
Excellent explanation. Thank you. Other questions or comments?
This is Kristen. James, did I hear you say there are 4 letters of objection?
Yes.
Could you just give us a sense of what folks are objecting about?
Yeah, I spoke personally with at least 2 of the people who were objecting. It seems that primarily they just didn't see the benefit to them. One gentleman did feel that his properties didn't retain sufficient integrity, and we did take his argument seriously and compared it to the methodology in the nomination and photo documentation that he provided. And while there was some decrease in historic integrity, it still met the methodology of the nomination.
Interesting.
Thank you for that.
Well, I like the maps in this one. They take you from location to the contributing and non-contributing properties. Good historic images. Did you struggle at all with the integrity west of Mather Street? And did you have any conversations with National Park Service about the relative proportion of non-contributing to contributing structures as you get to that end of the district?
Yeah, we did have a conversation. In fact, the situation with the ACA building being called out on its own was a compromise that we worked out with the National Park Service, because originally the thought was that the period of significance would be brought up to the 50-year mark, 1971. Unfortunately, as the research progressed and we looked more deeply at what the the development history was of this corridor, it really had filled out by 1940, and the only really significant piece of architecture really of any kind after 1940 was the ACA building. There are interspersed some, like gas stations and some grocery stores that date to the 1950s and 1960s, but they are you're not really gaining anything with them, unfortunately. You know, that they have greatly reduced integrity, some of them, and they're not particularly noteworthy for understanding the development of this corridor. And to cut it shorter than you know, to bring it in farther east,
right,
you know, did cut out a good part of the corridor and the understanding of this of Main Street, really. So that's why it was retained. But earlier on, there were more contributing, but when you actually sit down and you look at the math, the vast majority of the non-contributing are secondary buildings, or, like I said, there's like some gas stations. You know, they're minor buildings that would not have that really don't materially add to our understanding of the district.
Thank you, James. Good answers to difficult questions. Other comments about the Main Street Historic District in Binghamton, or a motion to approve?
James, this is Michael Lynch. In the lower right-hand corner of the previous slide and in the right-hand picture, you're going back and forth, the Statue of Liberty keeps showing up. Do you have any idea what's going on in Binghamton with the Statue of Liberty?
If you go to the last slide, the one that shows the ACA building, yeah, that's for the that's the American Civic Association. So that's the one about integrating immigrants into American society. So, you know, they're very big on sort of that kind of melting pot imagery. So that's why that Statue of Liberty is there.
But there's also one on the the previous slide, on the roof.
Oh yeah, that's the that's the American Legion building. It's a American Legion post.
Is that an image of the Statue of Liberty?
Yes, it does have one on, but that I mean, it was a residence, but it's currently a American Legion post.
That's two. All right. I think we're still waiting for a motion to approve.
Hi, this is Wayne. I'll make that motion.
Any second?
This is Erica. I'll second.
Erica with another second. Thank you. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent.
Doug, this is Daniel McKay again. I just want to note that a casual visitor to Binghamton driving that stretch of Main Street would almost automatically presume that that part of the city was already listed on the National Register. And so this is long overdue. Right. And I just appreciate, James, your work to get this accomplished. And you know, surely we will see some initial use of the tax credit program here, but this is a great accomplishment for Binghamton, because any visitor would assume that this stretch of that city was already recognized by the National Register program.
Thank you, Daniel. Moving now to Albany and the Consolidated Car Heating Company Complex.
The Consolidated Car Heating Company Complex is significant under criteria A and C in the areas of industry and architecture, is the headquarters and factory of a national leader in the manufacture of heating equipment for railroad cars, trolleys, buses, and ships, and is an example of the evolution of design in industrial buildings. The complex consists of one interconnected factory building with four major components constructed in stages between 1893 and 1965, as well as a standalone one-story brick garage constructed circa 1920. Next slide, please. The 1893 and 1906 brick sections of the building reflect 19th century industrial architecture in their mill construction, wood floors, and paired sash windows. The 1913 to 1914 section exhibits features common to early 20th century daylight factory architecture, with a reinforced concrete structural system and large glazed expanses of windows that provide huge expanses of light and open floors and illustrate the transformation in factory design. Next slide, please. And this shows the typical factory spaces, the upper left being the mill construction and the lower right being the concrete construction. Next slide, please. During both World Wars, Consolidated Car Heating produced weapons and other equipment for the governments of the United States and Russia. Developments made possible by its wartime metal production led the company to transition into other fields, and it consequently changed its name to Consolidated Metal Products in 1919. In 1934, the company introduced a metal alloy that was well adapted for the manufacture of partial dentures, leading it to eventually sell off the transit division in 1958 and change the company name to CMP Industries as it began making plastics mainly for dental applications. In 1954, Consolidated Metal acquired a factory that made hydraulic and pneumatic lifts used in car repair, developing a high-strength alloy in the making of the lifts. This led to the construction of an addition in 1965, which you see in the lower right there, to house the automotive lift factory. The 1965 addition typifies simple metal and concrete construction of this era and marks the conclusion of the principal acquisitions that allowed the company to fully transform itself and reach new levels of achievement in subsequent fields. The Consolidated Car Heating Company complex has an approved commercial Part 1 and a letter of support from the City of Albany. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, questions or comments about Consolidated Car Heating Company?
Mr. Chairman, this is Wint. One thing that surprised me was that they didn't locate this factory on a rail line. Many of the up-and-coming factories in the northern part of Albany were put on rail lines, or the rail lines were developed to service them, but not in this case. One other thing, in the nomination, Robert Prine is identified as, I think, the founding chairman, at least a member of the board, from an early time, and it's worth noting that Prine was, for 50 years, the president of what is today Key Bank. It was then the National Commercial Bank of Albany, and a great supporter of local businesses. And naturally, as a leading banker, the businesses were eager to have him take an interest. More to the point, in terms of our own interests in Prine, he was the man who instigated and owned for most of his adult life the wonderful Camp Santanoni in Newcomb in the Adirondacks, which is now a National Historic Landmark and a very popular attraction up there.
Indeed.
I'm happy to move this nomination.
Thank you, Wint. Do I have a second?
This is Chuck. I'll second it.
Great. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you for that information, Wint. And staying in Albany, the residents at 272 Albany Avenue.
And this is my last one. This is in Kingston. The residence at 272 Albany Avenue meets National Register Criterion C as an example of colonial revival architecture that illustrates the changing social, economic, and cultural development of the Albany Avenue neighborhood. The property meets the registration requirements as outlined in the multiple property documentation form, the historical and architectural resources of Albany Avenue. The residential development of Albany Avenue was largely from 1870 to 1920 and provided housing for both the employees and executives of nearby cement and brick companies, which formed a pillar of the local economy. The nominated property was occupied from 1901 to 1954 by the Brigham family, whose multi-generational wealth was created both by the cement and brick industries. And you'll notice in the small photo on the left here, you see the name Brigham in the bricks. They did some small renovations to the house in the early 20th century, and so they used their own bricks when they did it. Next slide, please. Many of the homes on Albany Avenue were built in some combination of Queen Anne and colonial revival styles, which were popular in the United States at the time. Sorry. Built circa 1890, the building exemplifies traditional colonial revival characteristics, including the use of dormers with an interrupted hipped roof, dentiled cornice, full width columned porch and a porte cochere. The main entrance has a wooden surround with a stained glass transom and side lights. Despite the installation of vinyl siding and some window replacement, the residence exhibits a high degree of integrity of materials and craftsmanship, especially on the interior. Next slide, please. The interior features original detailing, including a decorative wooden newel post, turned balusters, and wooden rail, columns delineating openings between the various spaces, such as the parlor, elaborately carved mantels with tiled surrounds, and hardwood floors with inlaid borders. The residence at 272 Albany Avenue has an approved homeowner Part 1 and a letter of support from the city of Kingston. And I would like to note that while I did help with this nomination, it is largely the work of a homeowner who had no experience doing this.
It seems like they did a pretty good job. Questions or comments about 272 Albany Avenue, Kingston? It is a beautiful interior. Do I hear a motion? I'll move it. Does anybody want a second?
So moved. This is Carol.
This is Went, seconding.
Wait a minute. Somebody tried to make that motion. What's that?
It was Carol Clark seconding your motion.
Okay. I got the first. Carol's got the second. Any opposed or abstained? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Next up is Catherine Frank and the Hillard Castle.
Good morning, everyone. And I want to say that I think our owners and sponsors are on the call, and their names are Scott Cokeleffel and Tyler Barnett, but they are in a remote location, somewhere even more remote than Sullivan County, and so they were not sure that they were going to be able to link in. But anyway, so everyone knows about Lindbergh's famous nonstop flight across the Atlantic in 1927, but who knew that someone from our own Sullivan County followed closely in his tailwind only a few years later? This is Oscar Hillig from Liberty, New York, and his pilot, Holger Horace, on a trial run over Manhattan just before their own transatlantic flight. Their flight may have been the third, the fourth, or even the 10th. However, it is still among the earliest group of nonstop transatlantic flights. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is Oscar Hillig. He was born in Germany. He immigrated to New York as a teenager and settled in Liberty in 1897. He became interested in photography, bought a camera, and began to photograph local scenes. Within a few years, he had his own studio, and he became tremendously successful, providing photos of residences, summer homes, hotels, and scenic views. Next slide. He amassed a huge catalog of images of regional, cultural, and natural landmarks, which were often purchased by tourists and sent home. And as a result, he became a major promoter and booster for the region, and he had a large impact on the local economy, which at that time was mainly dependent on the tourist industry. He then branched out into more creative endeavors. He took a cross-country auto trip, and sent back photos and dispatches to the local newspaper. And next slide, he was an early proponent of air travel. Next slide. He added aerial views to his collection of postcards, and that boosted his income, his reputation, and Liberty's repute. Next slide. In 1929, Hillig and Horace decided to attempt a transatlantic voyage themselves. And here they are on the top, posing with the Liberty, and on the bottom, taking off for their adventure from the Liberty Country Club on June 24th, 1931. 32 hours later, they landed in Germany, and in Copenhagen, they were greeted by 60,000 people, including the King of Denmark. Upon their return to the States, which was by sea, they received a hero's welcome at New York City Hall and a giant parade and celebration in their hometown of Liberty. The trip had tremendous PR value for Hillard, for his business, and for the village of Liberty. He became the county's favorite son and even served a term in the state legislature. Next slide. In 1934, at the height of his successful career, living alone above the village studio no longer satisfied the photographer, and he purchased a large plot of land atop Washington Mountain and built Hillard Castle, which is the subject of this nomination. And he virtually owned all the land that you see in that photograph there. And note the letters spelling out the Liberty in front of the castle. So next. Hillard Castle is significant under Criterion B in the areas of recreation and commerce as the resource most closely associated with this important Catskill regional photographer, Otto Hillard, and under Criterion C in architecture as a distinctive example of a picturesque castle in the Catskills region. The design is loosely based on Hillard's recollections of European castles. Like most American castles of the type, most American examples of the type, the building is basically a domestic form with an applied stone exterior and a crenellated stone tower. Its method of construction is slightly unusual because it was built of poured concrete with local river rocks embedded into the exterior and studs embedded into the interior. The plan follows a form typical for rustic lodges, consisting of one great room open to the rafters and smaller, less decorated secondary spaces surrounding it. And like all good castles, it commands a hilltop. So this is an historic view of the castle, and the side elevation features the main entrance, along with the terrace and a nice view of the tower. Next slide. This is the same elevation today. The building is in the middle of a substantial rehabilitation using the homeowner tax credit. An addition on the terrace has just been removed, and the terrace is in the process of being restored. Next slide. Okay, this is a detail of that elevation, and you can see the decorative stone and brick detail around the windows and also the entrance steps. Next. Next. Okay, another contemporary image. This is, well, the front of the building. The ground level there had a garage entrance, and you'll note that the crenellations have not yet been restored on the tower. You can also see the half timbering detail in the gable, and also note that the windows have been replaced, but the original openings remain, and the windows will be restored as well. And then one more next. This is the other side elevation. You also see that a chimney there is under restoration. Okay, now for the interior. Next slide. So this is an historic image. That is Otto sitting by the fire. And then on the other side, note the character-defining features of the huge stone mantle, the open ceiling with exposed rafters, and the balcony on the window end there. And now the next slide. This is the current view, that same exact view. The mantle remains the same. The large open space remains the same. The space is still open to the rafters, which you can see. However, sadly, the balcony and the wall finishes have been lost. Okay, next slide. And this is looking in the exact opposite direction. Again, all the individual spaces can be read. The loft up there contained 2 bedrooms and another balcony. And that is one of the bedrooms you see on the right. But the balcony and the finishes have been lost. So what can we say about integrity for this resource? And I will say that we did confer with the National Park Service on this resource as well. So before we talk about that, let's take a look, next slide, let's take a look at the view from inside the residence. This is today's view. The view from inside the residence survives and it is very lovely. And then next slide, and the spectacular setting, which also survives. You can see the tower right about in the middle of that slide, above the trees. And that cleared, the snowy part there is the part that Hillard had cleared for the setting. So the setting and the view and the location are what I consider to be among the most important character defining features for the castle. And then next slide, this is another historic view. In terms of the exterior of the building, we have form, massing, materials, and design, in addition to location and setting. Most of those elements on the exterior that are missing are in the process of restoration. In terms of the interior, we have the space and the plan. We have the spatial relationships. We have the great room with its size, its overscale stone mantel, and its open rafters. And we have the views from the great room. Some of the rest will be improved with new windows, and some is a matter of wall finishes with paint. I think the loss of the balconies is the most serious thing in terms of compromising design and feeling, but I do not think it is so serious that affects eligibility. The balcony that defines the bedrooms is being rebuilt, but the other cannot be constructed today to meet code. So they're going to do a simple staircase to the balcony, or to the tower, and the tower will be restored so that you can go up into it and experience the view again. So would Otto Hillard recognize this as his home? I'm quite sure he would. And I feel that it's a privilege to be able to document such an important part of Catskills regional history. If you go online, you can find thousands of Hillard postcards. He played a major role in documenting an important era in the Catskills. Is this building also intact enough to represent the small castle type? Yes, I believe it is. Between the mountaintop setting, the funky river stone exterior, the tower, and the great room, I think castle is the only word you can use to describe it. So we have one letter of support from the owners, and if Scott and Todd are on the call, I would like to ask them to speak. And I don't think we have ever found a more enthusiastic pair of sponsors, especially in view of how much work they were looking at to bring this house back. They've really been working with Dan McEnany and me for a number of years, and it's looking way better than it did before. But the two of them never lost confidence in the project. So Dan might be able to speak to the tax credit part of it if you have questions about that. But do you have questions about the Hillard Castle?
Questions about Hillard from the board? Do we have guests that want to say something?
Oh, I don't see them on here.
Hi, this is Scott Coklefo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi,
Yes,
I'm here with Tyler Barnett. Kathleen, thank you so much for the presentation. It's wonderful. This has obviously been a project of love for us. It is currently underway, and we're going through construction with very little problem. We're able to source so many of the original materials, including the Never Sink River stone and the exact profile of the metal roofing. And we're restoring the windows to the historic, specifications, and we're really excited that it's all coming together.
Nice. Thank you.
I'm so glad you could get on, Scott.
Yeah, that's great.
And thank you, everybody, for your consideration.
You're welcome. Questions from the board? Or a motion to approve?
This is Wint. I'd move approval.
Second?
This is Gretchen. I'll second it.
Excellent. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, Kathleen.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, good job. Moving on to Virginia Bartos and the Gregory Tract Historic District in Rochester.
Good morning. All my presentations are for resources located in Rochester, Monroe County, which is also certified local government. Before I go on, 2 questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. And the second question is, the sponsor of the Gregory Tract Historic District was the Landmark Society of Western New York. Does Wayne need to recuse himself?
Hi, hey, this is Wayne. When this item came up, I think last meeting, I did in fact recuse myself. And I'd be happy to do that. I'd be happy to do that today as well. Thank you.
And that is not an impact on our quorum?
I don't think it should be.
No.
That is correct. We have enough other members. We have 9 other members on the call.
Excellent.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Virginia.
All right. The nominated district is located in the southeast part of the city of Rochester, and the inset in the upper left shows the nominated boundary, and the red arrow points to the historic Gregory tract. To help you get your bearings, the district is northeast of Mount Hope Cemetery, which you can see in the lower left, and east of the South Wedge Historic District that was located in 2013. You can see Highland Park and large areas marked Ellwanger and Barry. The Landmark Society of Western New York is working with homeowner associations in these areas, so we should be seeing more district nominations for these in the near future. But back to the matter at hand. The nominated district takes its name from James H. Gregory, a lawyer, farmer, and real estate owner who began subdividing and selling his lands in the 1840s. The district contains 509 contributing primary buildings and only 17 non-contributing primary resources, with the majority of the buildings being residences. The period of significance is 1845 to 1970. The district is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of community planning and development for its role in this part of the city developing as a largely working-class neighborhood with affordable homes that were at first close to work sites and later with ready access to the street railway system. This was a reflection of the rapid industrial growth of the city that accelerated in the late 19th century and continued well into the 20th. It is also being nominated under Criterion C for the large collection of late 19th and early 20th century vernacular housing. The images here show Cayuga and Nicholson Streets in the northwest end of the district, and some of the few commercial buildings in the lower right, these located on South Clinton Avenue. Streets were laid out in a grid pattern, and the buildings seen here are on 2 streets that intersect near the center of the district, Mount Vernon and Caroline Streets. Caroline is the longest street in the district, extending from the east at South Goodman nearly to South Avenue on the west. The church seen in the lower right is the Lutheran Church of Peace, now the South Wedge Mission, built in 1828 at 125 Caroline Street. Here's some more views of Caroline Street and one of Meg's in the lower right. As stated in the nomination, most buildings in the district are vernacular interpretations of 19th century domestic styles, and many of the streets have 1 1/2 story gable front cottages. The repetition of patterns clearly indicates at least one builder for a particular street or section in the district. The consultant looked through building records to see if these can be credited to one or more builders, but unfortunately came up empty. Here are views of Meigs and Oakland Streets in the upper images and Dean and Sager Streets in the lower portion. As stated in the nomination, the 1880 census recorded that 54% of residents in what became the nominated district were first and second generation German immigrants, and 8% were first and second generation Irish. Laborers and Teamsters were the most prevalent occupations. Some of the streets in the nominated district are quite narrow, and you can see the difference in the street width as depicted here. The tract was largely built out by 1930, and over the years, roughly 120 garages were built. That comes to a ratio of roughly 1 garage for every 5 houses, with the last garages being added in the late 1960s. One last slide of buildings here on Sager, South Goodman, and Benton Streets. We concur with the consultant that the streetscape integrity is quite high, with the absence of gaps due to demolition, and that the individual building level of integrity reflects the typical evolution of these more modest houses with expansion and maintenance. There seems to be general support for this district to date, as our office has only received 6 notarized letters of objection. Letters of support, unfortunately, nothing, but I did get 1 supportive phone call. The nomination was partly funded by a grant from the Preservation League of New York State and NYSCA. Any comments or questions?
I like the attention to detail in this nomination with respect to distinguishing this district from other adjacent districts and having its own sort of flavor. Was there ever any consideration given to limiting the period of significance to that roughly 1930 period?
We're looking into that. We've asked the consultant to look at some of these questionable garages to see if we can, adjust that end date.
Mm-hmm.
For now, we're keeping it at 1970, but it may be more like 1968.
And that's to accommodate the construction of garages for houses that didn't have them?
Yeah, well, for the extant garages, because many of them are contemporary and compatible with their design.
I see. Thank you. Other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, this is Kristen. Virginia, did I misunderstand? Did you say you have letters of support or letters of objection?
Letters of objection.
And I know I'm always curious about what those are, and I always kind of feel like it's important on the record to know.
Yes.
So could you share us in a summary of what those objections are?
They're pretty standard, people not wanting their individual house listed. But I did get two, which I think were confusing. We send out information about the homeowner tax credit, and two of them stated that they were not financially able to keep up their house. So I need to respond to them and assure them that the homeowner tax credit is a voluntary program, and they are not required when this district gets listed to participate in that program.
Thank you.
Any other questions or a motion for the Gregory tract?
Yeah, this is Jay. I'm happy to move it.
Second?
Carol, happy to second.
All right. Any opposed? Wayne Goodman abstains. Are there any other abstentions? There being none, the motion carries with one abstention and with a good quorum.
Thank you. My next presentation is the Lawyers Cooperative Publishing Company Complex. This is a federal commercial tax credit project that recently got its Part 1 approval. This view shows the Erie Canal Aqueduct, now Broad Street, and the building on the right when it was the Upton Dunn Shoe Company. You can just barely see it there. You can make out the letters. The building was acquired by the Lawyers Cooperative Publishing Company in 1901, and after 3 expansions, the building commonly was referred to as the Aqueduct Building. You can also barely see the statue of Mercury on the left over the Kimball Tobacco Company. The statue was added to the Lawyers Cooperative Building during a 1971 renovation after the period of significance, and therefore it's non-contributing. The property map on the left shows the main Lawyers Cooperative Building, 2 warehouses across Grape Street, now interconnected, and the 1874 standalone building that was purchased in 1953 for the microfilming operation. The river, or rather bridge view on the right, shows the main building expansions, and going from left to right is the former circa 1892 Upton Dunn building. The lighter colored brick is the 1910 edition, and beyond is the 1948 expansion and incorporation of a circa 1884 mill. This section had 2 floors added in 1971, along with the tower and the statue. I referred to the period of significance earlier. Actually, this nomination has 2 periods of significance, directly related to the criterion on which the complex is being nominated. The complex is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of industry, and the period of 1901 to 1961 reflects its growth and the presence of Rochester, that is, the company's growth and presence in Rochester, before moving to a new facility in the suburbs. The other period is 1870 to 1953 that corresponds to Criterion C architecture, covering all dates of construction for acquired buildings and expansions of the Aqueduct building, that is 1910 to 1953. All buildings and expansions are excellent examples of late 19th century, early 20th century mill construction. And just to clarify, the period of construction for Criterion C, again, is 1870 to 1953. This slide shows the non-contributing one-story garage and one of the connecting walkways, both built after the period of significance. You can see them in the upper left. The lower image on the right is a better view of the two warehouses that were acquired in 1913 and 1950. The tall building on the right is the 1891 factory that was acquired first. That would be 1913. And the Lawyers Cooperative Publishing Company printed affordable law books and publications that grew to have a nationwide distribution and needed warehousing of materials. The Arcade Mill, also seen, is the lower building. When acquired in 1950, it provided additional warehousing capabilities, and the two buildings were interconnected in the 1950s. Also, the Arcade Mill was state register listed in 1985. Interiors largely reflect the most recent renovations. Historic elements were incorporated into the renovations, such as seen here in the main building. Wooden box support posts, historic elevations, and historic staircases and ceilings are visible throughout the building. These are interior views of the warehouses across the street that show historic features incorporated into renovations, such as the Buffalo-made carry safe in the upper left. Some of the warehouse upper floors are untouched, showing open factory or rather warehouse space. Last are interior views of the standalone mill building used for the microfilming operation. The view on the left is the basement area that shows some of the mill machinery near the ceiling. The building was constructed as a flour mill and in 1944 became the Rochester Optical Manufacturing Company before the Lawyers Cooperative purchased it in 1953. That's it for the Lawyers Cooperative. Any questions or comments?
If there are none, I await a motion to approve if the board so wishes. I'll make the motion.
Hey, this is Wayne. I will make the motion.
All right, Wayne gets the motion and I'll get a second. Any opposed or abstaining for this one? There are none, so the motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you. On to the next one. Next is the Leander Mccourt Houses Historic District in the northwest part of the city near Maplewood Park. The nominated district is small, containing 5 houses that are being nominated under Criterion C for architecture primarily as being designed by Leander Mccourt between 1923 and 1924. All 5 share Tudor Revival features, attached garages, and orientation facing the park. As stated in the nomination, the group was Mccourt's attempt to recreate a small English country atmosphere. Each house is sited slightly forward from its neighbor, allowing a clear view of each house when looking down the street, and you can clearly see that in this image. Mccourt was a Rochester native who studied mechanical drawing at the Rochester Mechanics Institute, now RIT, before heading to Paris to further his studies at the École des Beaux-Arts. After returning to Rochester, he worked for architect Charles Crandall and then briefly at Kodak. He joined the architectural firm of J. Foster Warner in 1901, leaving in 1910 to establish his own practice. He became one of Rochester's best-known residential architects and earned a reputation for designing homes in the English manner and French chateau style. To enhance the garden or park-like appearance, Mccourt included a vast lawn only broken by brick walks from the front doors to the sidewalk. This was achieved by placing attached garages to the rear of the houses, making them invisible from Maplewood Drive. A private drive along the rear property line provided access and also afforded privacy to the backyard. Houses shared similar features such as stucco exteriors, large front windows, sloping roofs, sun porches, French doors, and casement windows. However, no two are alike. Some had half timbering, others had projecting gabled entries, some were front gable and L-wing forms, and one featured a side gabled roof and a side main entry. Interiors included large living room fireplaces, built-in cabinets or shelves, crown moldings, tile floors in some rooms, and staircases with flat balusters. Mccourt houses can be found in and around Rochester, but this grouping is unusual for it being purposely built as a group of 5, with the selling point of picturesque views of the park. I thought I'd leave you with this view from the inside of 285 Maplewood Drive. And I'd like to introduce you to the owner of 285 Maplewood Drive, who was the researcher and author of the nomination, Cheryl Leonard. Cheryl, would you like to add anything to this presentation? You could unmute her.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say that it is such a unique experience to drive by these houses. This isn't a criteria facet of it, but worth noting that one comes off the 104 expressway and you have to slow down. There's a traffic light and people are slowed down and they're immersed in the 20s. They have the Frederick Law Olmsted Park on their right and these houses on the left, and it just gives a calming experience. And they're very visual because this road connects to Lake Avenue, which is a north-south artery. So it's just such a wonderful welcoming to city life, and I'm grateful for the encouraged investment in them further. Thank you.
What an interesting description of how you come off the highway and get into this nice little secluded section of Rochester. Well said. Questions or comments from the board?
This is Wint. I'm interested in that service lane behind. Do you know whether each segment is included in the ownership of the individual house lot, or whether it's commonly owned with a common right of way and maintenance obligations by all property owners together?
That I do not know, but Cheryl may know.
It's my understanding that it's commonly owned. That is certainly how we behave. We all chip in and do for our snow plowing, and we treat it as a community property.
Thank you. That was my assumption. It's very effective.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion?
I would move. This is Wint.
Do I have a second?
This is Erica. I'll second.
Do I have any opposition or abstention? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Thank you. Last but not least is the J. Hungerford Smith factory building along the railroad tracks near the center of the city. Again, if you know Rochester, this building is on the north side of the tracks, north of the Memorial Art Gallery and East Avenue. They're actually a fair distance from those two. I just wanted to mention some things that I thought people would be familiar with. And also, this is a federal commercial tax credit that recently received its Part 1 approval. The large J. Hungerford Smith factory building is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of industry as a major manufacturer of syrup and goods for the soda fountain trade. The company was founded in the late 19th century by pharmacist J. Hungerford Smith, who developed a cold processing method for syrups out of his kitchen in Ostable Forks before incorporating and moving the business to Rochester in 1891. By the time Smith moved his business to Rochester, it was one of the largest in the world, with the True Fruit Extracts and Syrups brand being the top seller. It first occupied a factory building near the canal that soon became too small, allowing Smith to purchase the Langslow, Fowler and Company furniture factory for the growing soda supply business in 1899. The continued growth of the business even outpaced the former furniture factory, but rather than move from a prime location adjacent to the rail yards, the company expanded to the west in 1902 and 1910, with the addition seen in the upper right. A new office building seen in the upper left, built in 1907, and an expanded powerhouse in 1917. Now you can see the smokestack in the office photo. Additions were added to the west in 1907 and 1920, seen in the lower right. The image in the lower right shows the south elevation, the 1907 and 1920 are in the lower left. Sorry, having a little trouble reading my own writing. And the image in the lower right shows the south of elevation of the original 1888 building and the south end of the 1907 addition. And remember, this is the side which is adjacent to the railroad tracks. The building is also being nominated under Criterion C for architecture. The original 1888 building was a design by the local firm of Otis and Crandall, and that is local to Rochester. And more research needs to be done to determine if they were responsible for any of the additions. The building is currently mixed use with some commercial, light industrial, and apartments. Recent renovations incorporated historic features when possible, such as wood supports, wood ceilings, wood and concrete floors, and connections between the sections, which we can see in the lower right. The upper right is an interior view of the main office building. Here are two more views of connections between sections on the right, a historic staircase, an interior view of the 1907 Section D space adjacent to the original 1888 building. Historically, the property included landscaping by Alan DeForest, none of which unfortunately survived. The period of significance begins with 1888, the date of the furniture factory, and ends with 1963, when the company moved to a new state-of-the-art facility in nearby Victor and sold the Rochester factory building. Questions or comments?
This is Wint. Several years ago, we reviewed and sent forward the nomination of a country house of someone known as the Soda Fountain King. I think his business originated in Brooklyn. And I have to assume that he was a primary client of this company, rather a nice connection. Somewhere in the nomination, the term is used, a pulvinated metal cornice. Is it known what a pulvinated metal cornice is? It caught my fancy.
I must have missed that one from the consultant, but I'll go back and check on it. I have no idea.
It's on page 26.
Julian is describing it.
A pulvination is an outward projection, usually in the breathe area of the cornice.
Okay.
It blows out.
Julian says it's a projection that bows outward.
Ah, so it's not a treatment of metal. It's a design feature. Thank you very much. I'm happy to move the project forward.
Okay, how big a deal is the truncated smokestack for overall integrity?
I don't think it is.
And did the A&W root beer recipe go to Victor?
Good question. That I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, Wint has moved this. We're waiting for a second.
This is Carol Clark. I'll second it.
Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Okay, here we are approaching the 12th nomination. It is around 11:35. We are flying through the schedule. There's a lunch break at 12:45, but I feel as though we're going to finish these before then. I'm going to propose we take a 4-minute break right now and come back and hit the 12th nomination, St. Peter's Protestant Episcopal Church in Brooklyn.
Mr. Chairman, when we come back, J.D. Lorenzo spoke up earlier, but he was not introduced at the outset as one of the board members. So
oh, excellent.
I would recommend that we have him introduce himself to the participants who don't know him when we come back.
All right, I'll see everyone at 11:40 and we will introduce Jay. Or I'll hear everyone. Okay, I have 11:40. The meeting is still in session. We did not adjourn. I just want to establish the fact that we have the quorum back. Somebody could confirm that, and then we'll introduce Jay DiLorenzo. Michael, are you back?
I'm sorry, I was on mute.
It's okay. Okay, so do we still have a quorum?
I'm looking at the sign-in list now.
All right, let's, before we move on to Jennifer Betzworth and the St. Peter's Protestant Episcopal Church, Brooklyn, Kings County, we will have Jay DiLorenzo introduce himself as a board member.
Thanks, Doug. Sorry, I was a minute late. Missed my intro slot. This is Jay DiLorenzo. I'm the president of the Preservation League of New York State.
Thank you, Jay.
And
Jennifer,
Mr. Chairman, I can confirm that we have reestablished a quorum.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Jennifer, are you ready?
I am here.
All right, you have the floor.
Okay, so to start with the St. Peter's Protestant Episcopal Church, which is now known as the St. Nicholas Antiochian Orthodox Cathedral. It's locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as an impressive example of a mid-19th century English-inspired Gothic Revival church building designed by one of the leading proponents of the style, Frank Wills. Next. Wills crafted a relatively simple building based on historic forms and limited the use of Gothic details to pointed arch windows and doors, austere window tracery, buttresses, and finials. Next. Just another image of the side elevation there to give you more of a sense of the building. Next. The building's interior features a high nave with blanking side aisles, which are clearly expressed in the exterior volume. The elaborate workmanship of the interior is evident through its exposed wood hammer beam trusses, the decorative murals of Old and New Testament figures, now supplemented by Orthodox iconography, a checkerboard marble tile floor, and stained glass windows. Next. The church is additionally locally significant under Criterion A in the area of ethnic history for its association with the growth of the Syrian American population in Boerum Hill. Lower Manhattan became home to a significant Syrian and Lebanese population starting in the late 19th century. Next. In response to economic pressures, the community and most of its institutions and businesses relocated to Brooklyn. This included the St. Nicholas Antiochian Orthodox Congregation, which had been founded as a chapel in Manhattan in 1895. Next. The congregation moved to Brooklyn in 1902 and purchased the former St. Peter's Protestant Episcopal Church in 1920 for its larger size and central location. The church played a key role in fostering the largest Arabic-speaking Orthodox Christian community in Brooklyn. It is the oldest continuously used church within the Antiochian Orthodox Christian Archdiocese of North America and its mother cathedral. Next. And that is St. Peter's. This was a Columbia student draft completed for sacred sites and finished by Landmarks Conservancy staff. And we have a letter of support from the Landmarks Preservation Commission. Are there any questions on this one?
Well, it's a beautiful building, and there's just an amazing amount of detail in the history and the social context in the nomination form. So that group is to be commended. Other questions or comments from the board? Or a motion to approve?
This is
I'll
Carol.
move. This is Wynn.
All right, I'm going to give the motion to Carol and give Wynn the second, based on how I heard that. Any opposed or abstained? There being none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. And another church.
Yep, from St. Peter's, we're moving on to St. Paul's. So St. Paul's Methodist Episcopal Church, now known as St. Paul's United Methodist Church, is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture for its striking classical revival design with Romanesque and Italian elements. It is additionally significant under Criterion A in the area of social history for its association with the establishment and growth of the congregation and the village of Northport. Next. Northport's oldest religious organization, the congregation was founded in the 1830s. Their initial church was small and replaced in 1851 by the building in the drawing on the left. The current building, constructed in 1873, incorporated part of the previous building, which was used as a Sunday school. Next. Designed by local builder Benjamin T. Robbins, the church references the temple form of its predecessor, but features an eclectic variety of styles and ideas. The patterns of stepped and inset brick framing in each bay, which reinforces a sense of verticality and creates a rippling rhythm across the facade, is particularly striking. Next. Compared to the congregation's previous wooden churches, this robust brick building reflected the stability of the congregation and the growth of the community. Next. The rear Sunday School addition, constructed in the colonial revival style in 2 campaigns, reflects the needs of the church as its congregation grew in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Next. The sanctuary was remodeled in 1932, around the same time, and that resulted in the installation of the present organ, which is the primary feature there of that wall you're looking at, with that grand frame and broken pediment. Next. There's a few more images of the sanctuary. Very simple. Next, beautiful stained glass. The gymnasium, located within the Sunday school, served as the site of numerous meetings, gatherings, and performances for the larger community. It seems to have been one of the larger spaces for anyone to gather. So for quite some time, it seems like it was the place. Next. During the mid-20th century, the congregation purchased 2 houses adjacent to the church to help further its mission. The Davidson House was purchased in 1961 as a thrift shop. Next. And the former Dr. Hyen's house was purchased in 1967 as a new rectory. These purchases reflect the height of the congregation's growth. Next. And that is St. Paul's. This project was also sponsored by Sacred Sites. Are there any questions on this one?
It's interesting to see buildings purchased so late in the history in 1967 and 1961 added to something so obviously of greater antiquity, but it's a testament to the vibrancy and the growth of the church in the community. I thought that was very well portrayed in the form, as well as the deep history of Methodism, even extending back into the 1700s. So good job there. Also a ton of photos, which is nice.
Yes, a ton of photos.
It's good to see. The more the merrier. Other questions or comments from the board? Motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve. It's Erica.
Erica, the first one. Do I hear a second?
This is Kristen. I can second.
Great. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Moving now to Kingston Gas and Electric Company, Ulster County, and Chelsea Towers.
Hello, I have 2 nominations today, both in Ulster County. So to start, we have the Kingston Gas and Electric Company, located at 609-611 Broadway in Kingston, is significant under Criterion A in the area of commerce as the former headquarters of the utility company that directed the city's adaptation of gas and electricity in the early 20th century. It was built in 1911 by the Kingston construction firm Campbell and Dempsey and opened to the public in 1912. The period of significance extends to 1945 when the building ceased functioning as the headquarters of Kingston Gas and Electric. Next slide. The Kingston Gas and Electric Company was incorporated in 1902 as a franchise of the American Gas Company, a Philadelphia-based organization whose growth was based on the acquisition of small local companies. By the 1910s, American adopted dozens of subsidiaries in the Midwest and Northeast. Like other national gas and electric conglomerates at the time, they expanded the service area of their franchises by investing in new infrastructure and public marketing campaigns. Next slide. The original interior layout during the utilities company's occupancy has been altered by a series of subsequent tenants, but historically contained a public retail space with a stockroom and administrative offices. From the street level retail store, it sold gas lamps, kitchen ranges, electric lamps, irons, toasters, KitchenAids, refrigerators, and freezers. In the offices upstairs, company managers maintained business contracts, monitored output of the power plants, and oversaw a sales force that carried out marketing campaigns to attract new subscribers. A thick-walled vault remains from this period near the core of the building, with the words Kingston Gas and Electric Company in gold letters above. Next slide. The American Gas Company sold many of its franchise holdings to Central Hudson, including the Kingston Gas and Electric Company, as Central Hudson grew to become the largest public utility provider in the Hudson Valley. Under the new subsidiary, the Kingston franchise retained its name and continued to direct all of its local business from its Broadway building through 1945. After that, a series of businesses operated out of the storefront, selling everything from furniture to typewriter ribbon. Overall, the Kingston Gas and Electric Company building played a valuable part in providing utility services to Kingston and surrounding areas and helped usher in a modern era over the course of nearly 35 years. The building is a current rehabilitation tax credit project with an approved Part 1 and Part 2. We also have one letter of support from the Mayor of Kingston. Any questions?
Questions or comments about the Kingston Gas and Electric Company? Or a motion to approve?
This is Gretchen. I'll make that motion.
And I will second it. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. We move to Asbury.
The Asbury Historic District is significant under Criterion A in the areas of exploration and settlement, ethnic heritage, and agriculture as a rare surviving example of a rural landscape representing nearly 250 years of agricultural use initiated by Johannes and Christina Trombore in the 1730s and sustained by their heirs into present times. The period of significance extends from circa 1730 with the initial settlement of the homestead through the 50-year mark in 1971. Next slide. The district is also significant under Criterion C for its surviving domestic and farm architecture, ranging in time from the early 18th century into the mid-19th century. Although commercial and trade buildings have been lost, the district retains virtually all of the houses depicted on the 19th century maps. Stone houses associated with each of the Trombore family members were built at various times in the 18th century and are distinctive examples of this Ulster County architectural tradition ranging from Dutch colonial to early Republican style. Next slide. The district is composed largely of 4 historic farms with associations to the Trombore family, who first settled on the fertile land along the Beaver Kill in the 1730s after abandoning the Palatine villages in West Camp on the Hudson River. The district contains just under 250 acres and is composed of 18th century and early 19th century structures stemming from the original division of the homestead. An 1858 map of the Ulster County depicts a concentration of buildings around the intersection of Old Kings Highway, the road leading east to West Camp, and the road leading west to the mountains, prominently labeled Tromboreville. Next slide. The Trombore Homestead, previously listed on the National Register in 1983, occupies 70 acres on the east side of Old Kings Highway and contains the mid-18th century stone houses built for Johannes Trombore, which is the sole landmark from the initial settlement period. The house was built one room at a time, as is typical in Ulster County stone houses, which came into fashion in the early 18th century as pioneer farms became more established. Next slide. The original homestead was divided between two sons of Johannes Trombore in the late 1700s, with a third son buying an adjoining farm and mill seat in 1805. Pursuant with the family's involvement in the Methodist faith, Tromboreville was eventually renamed Asbury in honor of Francis Asbury, who came from England as a Methodist missionary after the Revolutionary War. The Smith, Crawford, and Dillon farms, along with the nationally register listed Trombore Farm, make up the core of the family homesteads representing generations of family history. Next slide. As the Trombore's extended family continued to grow, their enduring presence has helped to preserve the historic rural character of the district. Expansive fields, now farmed by others, maintain the open space and agricultural land use. While some historic properties once concentrated at the crossroads have been lost, the farmsteads remain essentially intact. The four stone houses representing Trombore family members are distinctive architectural landmarks and illustrate the evolution of this significant local type. This nomination was sponsored by the Saugerties Historic Preservation Commission, and we have a letter of support from one property owner within the district. Any questions?
Yeah, questions or comments?
This is Wint. I'll just make a comment about the Trombore Homestead Farm. The Trombores 50 years ago who owned it became ardent opponents of the state power authority's proposal to build an immense nuclear power plant at Cementon, which is just around the corner. And they were very effective, along with lots of other people and organizations. I worked with them at that time. And I'm very pleased. I'd forgotten that their property eventually got listed on the National Register. And I'm delighted that the rest of this marvelous little district is going forward now. They would certainly be pleased if they're still alive. And I'm happy to be moving the nomination.
Thank you, Went. We have a motion. And so this is a district that's been formed by adding other family properties to something already listed?
So it is a historic district listing that incorporates a previously listed property.
Great. Its summary chart is just fantastic on this form. I wish all forms had a chart organized that way. Other questions or comments?
Carol Clark, I thought this was great that it's a certified local government funded nomination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Carol, do you want a second?
Sure, second.
Are there any opposed or abstaining?
Mr. Chairman, I note that Gretchen just signed out of the meeting.
Yep.
But we still have 10 members present, which constitutes a quorum.
We had 11? Oh, that's good.
Yeah, we had 11.
So n equals 10. All right, excellent. Thank you. Again, any opposed or abstaining for Asbury HD? There being none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent with 10 members voting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And we're moving now to the Van Slyke House in German Flats and Aaron Zernecki.
Good afternoon. This is Erin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. The Van Slyke House is a 57-acre property located in the town of German Flats, Herkimer County, and is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of Greek Revival style that exhibits distinctive character-defining features. Next slide. The house is also eligible under Criteria Consideration B as a moved property. In 1953, due to the construction of the New York State Thruway and the reconfiguration of State Route 5S, the house was moved by the homeowner about 180 feet south to just south of the new State Route 5S. The house retains a semblance of its original setting such as its orientation to the main road, street frontage, and wooded surrounding, and the semi-rural setting. Next slide. The house was built in 1860 and is a 1.5-story upright and wing, wood frame, clapboard residence with a standing seam metal roof. A 1-story wing with full-length porch extends to the east, with an enclosed porch to the east of the wing. The front gabled facade of the main block is 3 bays wide with a side hall entrance, deep cornice, cornice returns, and corner pilasters. The main entrance features entablature, square pilasters, single pane horizontal transom, side lights, and a paneled wood door. All of the windows have lintels, wood frames, and corresponding shutters for the 6/6 replacement sash. The wing to the east of the main block is a 1-story, side-gabled, 3-bay wing with a full-length porch featuring a wide cornice and square columns with capitals. Next slide. The interior plan is largely unaltered. The main entrance opens to a stair hall. To the west of the stair hall is a parlor. Dining room is to the south. Small bedroom is in the southwest corner, and there are 2 bedrooms upstairs. The kitchen, pantry, and bath are located in the house's 1-story east wing, which is the main part of the house that has been modernized. Historic period finishes are largely intact, including wood flooring, doors and window moldings, and trim as well as plasterwork. This nomination was researched and written, very well I may say, by the current homeowner, Virginia Rogers, who is with us today on the call and would like to say a few words. Virginia?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity for this house to be part of the nomination process. And most importantly, I'd really like to thank Erin for her help and encouragement, beginning with my initial inquiries into this whole process and through the application. So thank you very much, and thank you for your consideration.
And this is the Van Slyke house. Are there any questions?
This is Wint. I wonder what happened to the farmhouse or farmhouses of the Millers and Dockstadders in the previous generations, or did this house replace it? Then they were lost by fire or something.
Virginia, did you find that in your research?
I did not find it on the parcel that remains, which is the 57 acres. This parcel was part of the 100 acres, and I do believe that the original houses would have been closer to the river, which would have been the highway for their, for the farm and for, for getting their products out. So at where this house is located, I do not see any evidence of that. I do believe that it's closer to the original Mohawk River beyond the canal, north of the canal.
And possibly under the alignment of.
Thank you very much. I assume that they're gone then.
So
appreciate it.
In the image we're looking at now for lot 43, did that lot extend to the other side of the new road? And so the building is still in the same lot it was built in?
Correct. It is still in the same lot. It was just moved a little bit south, so about 180 feet south of its original location, but still within the same lot.
And so how common is it for a structure to retain its sense of feeling and setting that's been moved?
Well, that's one of the things that MPS does require for moved properties, is that it retains its sense of the original location, and this one clearly does.
It clearly does. I agree. I would add the fact that it was only moved 180 feet to that introductory paragraph. That number is not there, and when I read that ahead of reading everything else, I gasped because I just wasn't sure how far it was moved. And I think that makes the point that it retains its setting. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Other questions or comments about the Van Slyke house? Do I hear a motion to approve?
Yeah, this is Jay. I'll move that.
Do I hear a second? I will second the motion. Is anyone opposed or abstaining? With no opposition or abstentions, the motion carries by unanimous consent. And we can move on to the Evangelical Lutheran Church at Hartwick.
Thank you. The Evangelical Lutheran Church occupies a quarter-acre parcel in the hamlet of Hartwick Seminary, town of Hartwick, Otsego County. The church is locally significant under Criterion A in the area of social history for its role as a rural Protestant church that served both the local community as well as the former Hartwick Seminary, the first Lutheran seminary in the United States. It also meets Criterion C in the area of architecture as a representative example of an early 19th century wood frame, Greek Revival style church that was remodeled in the late 19th century to reflect new ideas about ecclesiastical design. The period of significance, 1839 to 1956, encompasses the original construction of the church and renovations made in 1887, 1921, and 1956 that represent the social, programmatic, and architectural needs of the congregation and the community of Hartwick Seminary. Next slide. New York State chartered Hartwick Seminary in 1815, making it the first Lutheran seminary in America. The first seminary building was erected in 1815 in Hartwick, Patton, known as the hamlet of Hartwick Seminary today. You'll notice up in the upper left-hand corner, that's a historic photo of Hartwick Seminary, and that photo is from about 1860s. So there were some additions onto the original Hartwick Seminary building. The Evangelical Lutheran Church was built on the east side of what is now New York State Route 28, just across the road from the seminary and the President's house in 1839. By this time, the hamlet consisted of the seminary's brick buildings, a cemetery, a schoolhouse, and about 20 frame dwellings. The seminary itself served a significant purpose in the dissemination and teaching of the Lutheran faith, not only because it was the first Lutheran seminary in America, but because it was the only theological education institution for more than 300 miles. It additionally provided an educational venue for students not pursuing the ministry, as Hartwick Seminary was originally both a seminary and classical academy. Enrollment at the seminary was only around 60 or 70 students for the first few decades, but it increased steadily to over 100 students in the 1880s. And women were first admitted to Hartwick Seminary, the Classical Academy, in 1851. The church was built and established by residents of the local community, but also associated with the seminary, regularly featuring professors and graduates as pastors. In 1928, the New York Synod of the Lutheran Church moved the seminary's physical plant to Oneonta and established Hartwick College. In the wake of the seminary's move to Oneonta, the church took on a more central position as a key organizational force in the community and the regional Lutheran context. Next slide. Built in 1839, the church exemplifies the small rectangular form wood frame church buildings common in upstate New York in the first half of the 19th century. Its exterior was distinguished by restrained Greek Revival style massing and detailing and a two-stage bell tower. The original form and classical details of the church survive essentially intact today. The main block of the church is on a concrete block foundation that replaced the original stone foundation in 1956 when a full basement was added. The church is 3 bays wide by 4 bays deep. The exterior walls are covered in clapboard with trim, painted in a contrasting color, surrounding the windows and doors and marking the frieze and corners. The facade consists of a pediment with a wide frieze and raking cornice. The pediment appears to have tongue and groove flush siding. Corner pilasters can be seen behind the gable end entry addition, which was constructed circa 1887. This addition was built to accommodate a narthex at the interior. It is 3 bays wide with 2 pointed arch stained glass windows and a center door, double door with entablature, pediment, and pilasters mimicking the original facade. Next slide. Remodeling done in 1887 was both respectful to the original design while also influenced by stylistic aesthetics of the time. The front gabled main entrance addition provided space for a full narthex while also nodding to classical elements of the original building. The change from flat-headed window openings to pointed arch openings with stained glass windows illustrated the congregation's desire to present a more up-to-date design. Many of these late Gothic Revival style stained glass windows bear the names of former students and pastors associated with Hartwick Seminary. More changes were made in the 20th century to respond to the needs of the congregation. In 1921, the sanctuary saw the addition of a pipe organ from the Muller Organ Company. The Evangelical Lutheran Church has been an important component of the landscape in the community that grew up around Hartwick Seminary. The changes and additions that occurred to the building over time have been sensitive to its past, leaving its historic integrity intact. The church retains overall integrity of setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association from the period of significance. This nomination was researched and written by Cooperstown graduate program students and edited by the professor Cynthia Falk. This morning I received an email letter of support from the Town of Hartwick Planning Board. And this is the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Are there any questions?
Yes, this is Wint. Is Hartwick Seminary now Hartwick College, or are they independent institutions in Oneonta?
They are independent institutions. About mid-20th century, there was a disassociation of Hartwick College from the Lutheran synod, so they are not associated anymore. And Hartwick Seminary was pretty much done around that time period as well, mid-20th century.
I see, thank you.
I would comment that the Cooperstown grad program deserves a lot of credit for a really nice form, artfully done, beautiful use of historic photos, just a beautiful form to read. Other questions or comments or a motion to approve?
Jennifer Lemack, I will approve it.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second. This is Wint.
Wint got in for 2. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our last 2 and into the Adirondack region, I believe. Dan Bagro and the Church of the Ascension.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. The Church of the Ascension Chapel and Rectory are being nominated in association with Criterion A and Criterion C at the local significance level with a period of significance from 1884 to 1971. The Church of the Ascension Chapel, built in 1884, is a small Gothic Revival rustic woodlog church nestled in a clearing on the north side of County Route 46 at the north end of Saranac Lake. The accompanying rectory, built in 1903, is a modest example of a craftsman-style bungalow and is located a short distance to the west and on the opposite side of the street. Next slide, please. Both the chapel and rectory are set in clearings in what are otherwise predominantly wooded parcels. The village of Saranac Lake is located approximately 10 miles to the east. Next slide, please. While having a Gothic Revival form with steeply pitched gable roof, a belfry straddling the roof ridge, and tall, narrow window openings, the church has a distinct rustic Adirondack style as a result of its woodlog construction and decorative elements. The wood frame building is set on a series of granite fieldstone piers and has a small gabled roof canopy over the front porch and double beaded board entry doors. The many stained glass windows reflect the history of the families that spent their summers in the area and were responsible for the establishment of this non-denominational summer church. The top right photo shows the church entrance in 1895. The bottom right photo shows the church before it was expanded in 1903. The church was designed by New York City architect David Jardine, who was a guest of the Summer Inn originally associated with Church of the Ascension. The property reflects the vocabulary of the Gothic Revival style made popular in small rural communities by architects like Richard Upjohn, but is also uniquely rustic and representative of Adirondack log construction methods. This rustic aesthetic was deliberate and consistent with the romantic notions that the affluent summer visitors had of life in the unspoiled wilderness. Next slide, please. The rectory, in contrast, was not architect designed nor of log construction. It has a cross-shaped footprint with a full front porch that faces the lake, broad sweeping roof lines with deep overhanging eaves and shed dormers. The two-story house is clad in wood shingles with painted wood trim, 6/1 double-hung windows, exposed rafter tails with slightly flared eaves, and a central brick fireplace around which the interior spaces are laid out. While fully finished on the interior, the building sits on stone piers and has minimal heat and only seasonal water given its seasonal use. Next slide, please. The founding of Church of the Ascension and the later construction of the rectory were in direct response to the popularity of the nearby Prospect House Hotel, later known as the Saranac Inn, and the desire to create and expand upon a summertime community. Many of the inn's early guests and many of the initial inn owners would eventually purchase nearby land along the lakeshore and build their own summer homes. A colony of these great camps soon blossomed on Upper Saranac, yet the owners continued to rely on the hotel for meals, supplies, and entertainment, making the inn the community center of their daily needs and social activities. The growth of community and the church occurred within the larger history of the Adirondacks since the mid-19th century. Because guests of these remote resorts generally came for long, extended stays spanning the full summer, the creation of a summer church enhanced the feeling and sense of community. Next slide, please. Church of the Ascension is being nominated and associated with Criterion A in the area of social history for its association with the summer worship community of Saranac Inn and the greater Saranac Lake area, and Criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of Gothic Revival and Adirondack rustic architecture. Wait, I'm sorry. This repeats a little bit of my presentation, I apologize. Together, the chapel and rectory with its ancillary outbuildings are related to the summer worship community that began with the prominent guests of the Prospect House and Saranac Inn, and later with the seasonal residents that have camps of their own throughout the Saranac Lake area. The chapel and rectory have been in continuous use since constructed and still function in their original capacity. This nomination was researched and written by Kim Alvarez. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions or comments?
This is Jennifer Lemack. I was pretty impressed with the Twinkie nomination, but this one takes the cake. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. The history of the Adirondacks and the rustic architecture and seasonal churches and great camps and grand hotels is excellent.
And that podium or the pulpit is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find with this one, the photos really speak for themselves, and the rest of it is just, it's interesting frosting on the cake, so to speak.
Yeah. I would be happy to nominate it.
I'd be happy to second it, Lucy.
All right, Jennifer nominates, Lucy seconds. Any opposed or abstaining? The motion is carried by unanimous consent. Thank you, Dan. Moving now to Mountainside.
The Mountainside Free Library is being nominated in association with Criterion A at the local significance level in the area of education with a period of significance from 1904 to 1971. The library is a small two-room building located on the east side of Route 9L in the town of Queensbury, Warren County. Next slide, please. Located on a sparsely developed stretch of Route 9L on the east side of Lake George, the immediate setting is characterized by wooded surroundings and the neighboring properties at Joshua's Rock. The library is located approximately 3.5 miles northeast of downtown Lake George. Next slide, please. The library consists of the main block built in 1904 and an addition on the north elevation constructed in 1909. The library is a simple one-story wood frame front gabled building with a rectangular plan and stone foundation. The building has a mix of novelty and wood shingle siding, 1/1 sash windows, and smaller fixed pane windows. The black and white photo on this slide shows the library as it appeared in 1964. Next slide, please. The 1909 edition, seen in the image on the right, expanded the capabilities of the library by providing additional gathering space and room for books. Next slide, please. The interior of the library consists of 2 connected rooms, the main room of the original building and the addition, which is shown in the image on the right. Nearly every wall in both rooms is lined with built-in bookshelves. Much of the floor space is used by non-permanent bookshelves and tables to display books and other materials for patrons. Mid-20th century updates to the interior include replacement electrical wiring, drop ceilings, and drywall on most wall surfaces. Floors are primarily covered in linoleum. Next slide, please. The building was constructed in 1904 following the organizational and fundraising efforts of regional author and historian Edward Eggleston, seen on the left, who lived from 1837 to 1902. Eggleston was a 19th century author and historian who lived adjacent to the library at the Seeley-Eggleston family compound known as Joshua's Rock. His home, listed on the National Register, is called the Owl's Nest. Eggleston was among the earliest of America's regional novelists of the realist movement and perhaps the first writer to tap in a serious vein the literary potential of America's frontier experience. He decided in 1894 to establish a library for area residents and committed himself to raise money for what he called the Mountainside Library. New York State granted Mountainside a provisional charter that year to operate, and the library parcel was donated by Eggleston's father-in-law, Elwyn Seeley. Eggleston passed away in 1902, and his brother, George Carey Eggleston, editor of the New York World, pictured on the right, picked up the project and saw it through to completion. Next slide, please. The library was sustained by private donations, evening entertainments, and community suppers. By 1936, the Queensbury Town Board started donating $100 annually to help pay for books and maintenance. Volunteers were responsible for sorting and cataloging books, and the original card catalogs are still present. In the 1950s, the Glens Falls Post-Star dedicated a column to Mountainside's volunteers and their labor of love in maintaining the building. Today, the library looks much as it did when it began and remains very popular with both year-round and seasonal residents, with books being borrowed throughout the year despite the building's lack of heat. The unique honor system and volunteer nature of this independent library, in place since its founding, have been described as a handshake with the community. The photo on the right shows the library in 1964. Next slide, please. Mountainside Free Library is owned by the Board of Trustees of Mountainside, and this nomination is intended to be an honorary designation. The nomination was researched and written by Kit Seeley and myself, and I'm not sure if they've joined us today, but Kit is the great-great-granddaughter of Edward Eggleston and a writer with the New York Times, and also by Linda Long, president of the Friends of the Mountainside Library. And if they're with us, they'd like to say a few words, although I know we're significantly ahead of schedule, so I'm not sure if they've joined the meeting yet.
Yeah, that's one problem with being so ahead of schedule. I wondered about that, people wanting to step in for certain times or certain nomination forms.
I did let them know that we were ahead of schedule, but they do not appear in the guest list, so I'm thinking they're not here yet. So
yeah, okay. Well, the writing style in the description is just beautiful, and the references and the quotes used are just fantastic. Eggleston seems like an American hero to me. One of the things you mentioned in this form is that because of the 50-year rule, you have to stop the period of significance at 1971. So what happens decades from now when that timeline has moved? Would there ever be any return to this to extend the period of significance because it's something that's still ongoing and so well used and current?
I guess I'll defer to my more senior colleagues who could maybe speak to the general question, but I'm sure that if somebody wanted to update the nomination in the future, it would be a relatively easy task to do because there wouldn't be presumably a boundary change.
Right, right. Yeah, just something I was wondering about.
Yeah, no, you raise a good point, not just for this nomination, Doug, but for many nominations as they start to age, right?
Yeah.
So in fact, we are beginning to revisit some of the older nominations. And in some cases, if there is a reason to update a period of significance, whatever it be, in this case, it's the argument for ongoing education. So it's definitely, you know, once something starts to age, there's that possibility. And we're seeing more and more cases where we are revisiting very old nominations, particularly for historic districts. So good question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I also wanted to mention briefly that, you know, doing site visits in the COVID era has been difficult. And I have unfortunately not had an opportunity to visit a lot of the properties that I've been nominating since I joined the unit. But I did have an opportunity to visit the library a few weeks ago and meet with Kit and Linda, and it was a very charming experience. It's a very small library packed to the gills with books, and as a library, that's really what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So it was nice to see it in person and make a trip up there.
Nice. Other questions from the board? Mountainside Library.
This is Wint. I was interested in reading in the nomination that the adjoining property, the Seeley Eggleston property, was listed as a National Historic Landmark as long ago as 1971. And I'm not quite sure, I guess it was the writer's prominence in the 19th century that prompted the National Park Service to give that high honor. But was there a reason that the library wasn't included if it was adjacent to the NHL?
You know, Wint, I'm not quite positive. I did look at that. When this first originally came in, I wondered if it would have made sense to do an amendment to that. But looking at the areas of significance, there really was not a direct relation. So it just seemed more straightforward to just focus on this one for education and just keep them separate. But that was something I considered and looked into.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion?
Well, I'll move. This is Wint.
I'll second. It's Erica. I was wondering if there was any additional information on the Carnegie reference that's on the sign. Although
so that was something that we did look into. The state education sign out front does mention that this was a library funded by Andrew Carnegie. However, looking at the lists of libraries that were funded by his organization, this library does not appear on any of the lists for New York State, and the documentation for that seems pretty thorough. And it was a topic that I put Kit on to continue researching and see if she could find anything, and she was also not able to locate any sources for that. We have a suspicion that through Eggleston's brother, and Eggleston, who had some association with Carnegie, that perhaps it was more of a situation, an informal, like, hey, here's a check for your library kind of situation, but speculation on my part. We weren't able to find an actual source to document that. So there's a footnote in the nomination that says, you know, to the effect of, this hasn't been fully documented yet, but you know, it's hard to prove a negative. So.
Good question. Okay, so we had a motion and a second. Is anyone opposed or abstaining from this nomination? There being none, the motion is carried by unanimous consent. I believe that is our 19th and final nomination form for this aspect of the meeting. We are way ahead of schedule. We probably won't need to take a lunch break, and I just wonder, Daniel, if you are prepared to begin new business, or if that's on you or someone else.
Doug, would you repeat that question there, please?
We've gotten through the National Register reviews, and
Yes,
I think we're not going to have to do a lunch break. So we are zoomed all the way up to new business. And I wonder if that is something you're going to take the lead on.
You'll have to get me up in chat. I myself am not recalling that we have any new business.
The recognition of Michael Lynch as division director is the item listed on the agenda.
Well, I made remarks when I gave remarks earlier, noted his pending retirement, and noted that we are going to be preparing a board resolution with the assistance of staff here and members of the State Review Board for the December meeting.
Understood.
So
apologies for putting you on the spot there. I didn't know if there was more.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Well, I think one aspiration was that the December meeting might solidly land as an in-person meeting. I think it's hard to presume that at this point. Certainly Michael deserves an in-person send-off if at all possible.
Agreed.
That was one reason to defer.
Yeah, my plan was to bring Twinkies.
Erica, you can still send them, please.
Very funny.
Don't laugh. Hey, this is Cass, and don't laugh because had we met in person, Jennifer and I were prepared to bring an entire platter, Twinkies, ho-hos, and
nice
snowballs. Yeah.
Not that we wanted to sway you, but.
Yeah, that might be considered a bribe. All right.
As long as you didn't eat $15 worth, Doug, you should be safe.
I can't say I wouldn't. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Do I hear a second?
So moved, Carol.
Is anyone opposed or abstaining from a motion to adjourn? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent and the meeting is concluded at 12:32 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for your attention and your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, Doug, that the next meeting is scheduled for December 9th.
The next meeting is Thursday, December 9th, with the location to be determined. We are sincerely hoping that that will be Albany so we can see Michael in person.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.